Welcome back to the Human Perspective. Today, our guest is Rosemarie Garland-Thomson, who is a dear friend, and I'm so excited that she's going to be talking with us. You'll learn over the course of this brief time about her evolution and the impact that she has been having, not only domestically but internationally. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Judy. It's a delight to be here, and I'm very glad that we've been friends for as long as we have been friends. At least 20 years, we were deciding, right?
Exactly.
Right?
I was thinking of an introduction that I was going to give of who you are, but then I decided I want you to do that. So, you're a professor at Emory University, but you're a much more in-depth person. So, could you tell us a little bit about who you are?
I am to use the language that we use now, a thought leader on disability and disability justice. And it's been an evolution that is important. And when you and I are together, I think about this because you were one of the models when we first met at Society for Disability Studies a long time ago. I thought, oh, this is a whole world I didn't know anything about, because I was born disabled into a family that, of course, knew nothing about disability, like
Right.
so many of us. And I was completely isolated from other people with disabilities. I was able to go to school because I could get in the door.
Regular schools.
Regular school, yeah. And my mother, I think, fought for that, as we say, although there was no consciousness in our family about much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was just,
They
I
wanted
was
to
to go
save
out there and do things, and going to school was important. So I went to school. There was no, then, of course, there was no idea at all about adaptive anything. So whatever it was that I was not able to do, I was on the sidelines for. So during music, during PE, during a lot of the activities of school, I simply sat quietly, or I would draw on paper.
Did you want to participate?
I was learning to be a good girl. I never would have objected to the system. It never occurred to me that there would be the concept of an adaptive anything, because at that time, exclusions were not understood as inequitable.
So what time was this? What year?
It was a long time ago. Before the disability rights movement, before the civil rights movement, when I was a little child. But even during the women's movement, which I was awake to because I was young, it didn't occur to me that there was anything like disability identity. I didn't know any people with disabilities. There was one kid in my school who had braces on his legs. Neither one of us had much to do with each other. There was no sense of solidarity. But I'd always had a strong sense of solidarity with women because I come from a very woman-centered family. So when the women's movement began, I understood the logic of it completely. And it was only later that I was able to think the same things about people with disabilities.
Well, just for a couple of minutes, getting back a little bit more to you. You have 3 children.
I do.
And you have grandchildren.
I do.
So you're an academic, you're a thought leader, you're a wife, you're a mother, etc. How do you pull all those together?
Awkwardly and with grace sometimes. It was very important for me because I was an only child. And although I didn't know this at the time, I was an only child because my parents didn't want to have any more children like me. No one said that. I only learned that later. But when I did learn it, it was like those things that you somehow always knew. I mean, my parents were my parents loved me, and they were kind people. Our family has a lot of its own difficulties and challenges, but that really wasn't one of them. But it was very important to me I wanted a big family. And so that's why I wanted to be married. I wanted to have children. And that was important for me, to surround myself with people. I felt, it wasn't that I was lonely as a child. It was that I felt a sense of the smallness and limitations of my own family.
So, how has all of this played a role in the work that you've been doing? Because raising 3 children is a lot of work. You were studying at the same time. I think, as you said, you were more focused on women's studies, women's literature, etc. Disability came in afterwards. How did you begin to kind of pull all of this together?
Well, the women's movement, as I suggested, enlivened me. And of course, it was the time when people were enlivened about a lot of things. And I had been a really good girl and was invested in being a good girl. And it had served me well. And when I came to understand what the women's movement was about, when I came to understand the limitations that were structurally in place for women, it was very liberating for me. So I proceeded to live my life as if I were as a feminist. So I was invested in making a feminist family. I was invested in equality in terms of child rearing and homework and doing the kinds of housework, doing the kinds of domestic and family making that people do. So there were certain disadvantages, though, in place for women of my generation, because there was a great inequity between the amount of money, for example, that I could make as a school teacher, because my mother wanted me to go to school, because I think she understood that I probably wasn't going to be able to make a career out of marriage, which was, of course, what her generation had hoped for. She wasn't able to do that very successfully either, but that was her aspiration. But going to school was an important thing in case I didn't make a good marriage. But, of course, as a feminist, I had a completely different version of this. And so I attempted to raise feminist children and to make a feminist life, and to then see education and learning in terms of what we now call diversity and inclusion, or equity, or justice.
Disability become a more critical part of your life, both as an individual person and in the work that you were doing?
Well, disability was always a critical part of my life, in the sense that I understood, of course, that it was a source of stigma, and that I needed to manage that stigma.
How did you start feeling pride in having a disability?
Pride. I think when I discovered disability studies and the disability rights movement, which I did when I was in graduate school at Brandeis University, when my advisor in the English department said, go across the quad there, and there's this man called Irv Zola over there, and he's doing work around this. Why don't you go meet him? And I was toiling by myself, looking at representations of disability in literature, because nobody was doing that. But I had learned to do that from women's studies, because there was this recuperative movement in women's studies, there was women's history, there was look at works that women have done, look at how women have been represented in literature. And so I went across the quad and I met Irv Zola, and he showed me a bookcase that was filled with books, mostly sociology, on disability. He invited me to the disability studies SDS, the Society for Disability Studies meeting. He showed me Disability Studies quarterly, and I was off.
So, why do you think disability studies is important? And in your work, how are you integrating disability into the courses that you're teaching? And how do you work with others in academia to encourage them to act similarly?
Well, I'm able to build in my work in the humanities and in higher education in general on the work that, as I've said, the women's movement and the African American studies movement, other critical race theory, these other theoretical enterprises that are basically justice and inclusion initiatives that come from the sense of belief that education can be a tool for justice and, if you will, morality, that I think the 1960s did for education.
I mean, disability is so far behind other
Right.
movements. What do you feel proud about the work that you've been doing over the last years as far as integration of disability?
Well, for being able to make, I think, pretty clear and available the argument that, or the point that disability is an essential part of the human condition, and that these, what I call human variations that we think of as disabilities, and that's partly language I got from Paul Longmore, are part of every life and part of every family. So I want to, as they say, universalize disability. I want to say this is about all of us. And then I want to say that language and art and story and pictures, images, and these are the things that people in the humanities work with, make meaning. They create the world that we live in and the conditions in which we live, the distribution of resources, how we imagine ourselves and how we imagine and relate to one another. And so those forms of representation, the stories, the words, the pictures, those are really important elements of human life. And so I want to bring forward how disability is crucial in all these stories.
What is the message that you want to give to the audience about why disability studies is important and your suggestions of what they can do to become more engaged?
I would encourage you to tell your story, to find your community, to join your community, and to gather together to request, to demand that your school or your institution include you and serve you and teach about our history, to teach about our culture, to teach about our rights, to teach about our technology, and to join together to build what disability studies can and does do in the university.
Thank you very much for being with us. And I'm sorry that we don't have more time to speak. And maybe in the future, we can come to each other's parties and talk more about this. So let me thank you for joining us today. I hope that you take away from this the importance of telling story, the importance seeing yourself as a leader of bringing community together, whether we're looking at universities or elementary schools or high schools or graduate school, whatever, we are absent still way too much in the discussions. As we empower ourselves and we learn more about our history, we can become much stronger in legitimately demanding that disability be a part of the diversity agendas across the United States. We need to gain our voice and use our voice. I look forward to communicating with you again in the future. Have a good day.